What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to break down what's going on with SPY, Tesla, Nvda, the QQQ, and many tickers out there. I'm going to talk about what's going on with the news for the markets, what data is dropping for tomorrow, and what technicals you should be watching for going into tomorrow as well. Before I break down about all this information, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. And finally, don't forget about the Moomoo link. The offer ends very soon. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks with a $100 cash reward. The offer ends in just 1 day, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. SPY is up 0.39% for the day. It's also kind of green in the after hours, and overall, the market is still trying to hold up. And despite being red for the majority of the day today, despite the fact that SPY was selling off, we saw a very, very nice rebound at the very end of the day to get a green close. And overall, the market is still showing lots of signs of an uptrend, and it's still looking quite decent so far. But the question is, will we continue pumping like this tomorrow? Will the odds favor that? And what's going to affect it tomorrow? So I want to talk about that first before I start breaking down all this information. But for earnings, just remember we had Nike that just came out. They've given us some mixed earnings. And besides that, there's not much else coming out for tomorrow. But Nike was the biggest one that just came out. Nike just ended up beating on sales expectations, but they missed on earnings overall because of their margins that dropped. So we can see right here their EPS was very close to expectations, just a little bit under. The revenue ended up beating, which is quite good, and they beat some sales expectations too. So overall, very mixed, pretty good overall, and we will see what happens with guidance going forward. But for now, this is giving us a taste of how earnings are looking. So far, so decent so far. Anyways, when it comes to the data coming out for tomorrow, we have PCE data being released too. For PCE, basically, we have core PC coming out, and this is most likely going to be one of the most impactful things for the markets because Jerome Powell has been talking a lot about this. If PCE is a little bit too hot, especially on the core side year over year, we want this to be around 4.7% or under. That's what the forecast and consensus happen to be. So we want a low core PCE that comes out. If this is hot, the market could get a rug pull. So just be very careful with this. So far, this was for the month of May, and so far May was pretty decent for the CPI side. So things should be pretty decent for this. I know that the overall PCE should be pretty decent. We're just not too sure about core. Core CPI was very close to expectations, maybe a little bit harder than what we wanted. So just be very careful with core PCE coming out. And besides that, we're going to be watching other pieces of data. Now, the last thing that happened today was Bostic was speaking from the Fed, and they said something that was more on the dovish side, which was kind of surprising. They said that they believe the final rate hike is in and the Fed is not going to raise rates again, which is the exact opposite of what Jerome Powell ended up saying. So very interesting to witness. This is why the market ended up pumping at the very end. But besides that, after PCE comes out tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, we have at 9:45 a.m., so 15 minutes after the market opens, we have the Chicago PMI report coming out, giving us a good gauge of how the economy is doing. Then at 10 o'clock a.m., we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Report, inflationary expectations, the consumer expectations, and other things like that, which are going to be quite significant, at least for the market going forward. So what's going on for tomorrow? We have some data coming out in the morning. Then every 15 minutes after market open until about 10 o'clock a.m., we have more and more data. So please be ready for that. It's going to be very interesting to witness, and this will affect how the market moves, at least to some degree. But besides all this data, I can't really predict how the data will move out perfectly, but I can tell you guys what the levels are going to be to watch for, and that's what's going to be very important. So as far as SPY goes, just in a nutshell, this thing is trying to hold above the 50 EMA. Now, there are more meticulous levels you could look at, but I'm going to try to keep this video more broad because I went over these in my earlier videos. Basically, this thing is hovering above the 50 EMA on the 1 hour time frame. If it breaks down, first you're going to be watching 438. If that breaks, the next major support, okay, is going to be around 436.15 as of right now, maybe a little bit higher by the time we open tomorrow, looking at the 50 EMA as our support. So you're going to be watching that very carefully. Could this thing try to hold, for example, 437.5? That's a possibility too. Those are more meticulous levels, which I mentioned earlier. But we're not too focused on that for now. I'm just going to talk about the bigger levels. 436 is going to be a big one to watch for. And if that breaks, let's just say that this actually breaks below the 50, that's going to be a bearish signal. It's going to come all the way down to 434, then 433 as support, and even lower levels after that. If 433 breaks, it's going to come down to very close to 430. So we're going to be watching these supports carefully, just in case. But if this thing starts pushing to the upside, if SPY starts pushing up, okay, you're going to be watching 43As, which was a previous resistance. So we're going to be seeing if this could hold this entire level. If we hold this level and we start pushing up, the next level to watch for is going to be around 439 because we had an unfilled gap right over there. 439 is going to be the gap fill area. If it breaks that, watch 440, then potentially 442 as the next major resistance. And the previous high we made will come after that around basically around 444, which would come next after 442. So watch all these levels very carefully. These are some important support and resistance levels, and the way we open and etc. is going to depend on PCE data. So wait for the inflationary numbers just to be safe. I don't truly know what it's going to look like, so I don't want to make any guesses about what it's going to be. So I would rather just be patient and watch for it just to be safe. But what I can tell you is based off the technicals, okay, based off this setup, this looks more bullish from a technical setup, and this is leaning more in favor of the bulls because we have a nice inverse head and shoulders that was forming. The head was forming a nice bullish divergence. We have a left shoulder, now a right shoulder forming. We're hovering above the 50 EMA. If it keeps going, if this were to complete, there's a high probability this is going to eventually make its way closer to 440. We're going to likely try to fill this gap up here. The odds favor that, but always be safe and always be prepared for the data that's dropping because that could change how things go. All right, so that's basically my message for you. We look more bullish from a technical standpoint, but just to be safe, we have to watch the data coming out tomorrow morning. Don't forget about that. For Tesla, this is looking quite nice as well. If Tesla tries to push more, okay, the next major resistance, since we're currently at about 257.4 in the after hours, if this thing wants to push up, watch 257.5 as resistance. If it breaks above that, it's basically around like the 258 range, actually, because we did reject off 258 as well, but very close to that 258 range. If Tesla breaks that, watch 260. If 260 breaks on Tesla, this thing has a lot of potential to start pushing up quite nicely. If we manage to break 260 and we hold above it, I can see this thing making its way up to 262.5. And if that breaks, that's going to be your confirmation that Tesla's ready to keep going. And this thing is going to end up going up, in my opinion, to about 266, which is where we have this unfilled gap. If it breaks 266, it's going to likely get very close to 270, if not break that. And if that breaks, I mean, we have this imbalance all the way up to 275. That's going to be a crazy run if it runs that hard. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but it is a possibility. So don't rule that out. But if it breaks 270, watch that 275 area. Now, if Tesla breaks down, hypothetically, right now we're trying to hold this 50 EMA, this yellow line right here. We're trying so hard to hold this. And this is a moving average, which means that typically this would give us a good gauge of where Tesla has been in the past. You can see it's been uptrending in a positive direction, and it's looking a lot better over the shorter time frame relative to the longer one, which is where we have the 200. So if it breaks down, okay, if Tesla breaks down, the next major support is going to be very close to 255. This 254 to 255 zone basically is going to be acting as support. Basically, 254.78 is where the 50 is, so watch that carefully. If that breaks, watch 2.5 and then watch 250 as the next support, which is where we have the 200 EMA. If that breaks, there's more downside to come. Now, we need extreme news, in my opinion, to cause that to happen, but I don't really see that happening. What do I think is more likely for Tesla? From a technical standpoint, okay? And just remember, I gave you both the bullish and bearish cases just to be safe, but what is my bias? I'm leaning more bullish because when you look at this, there's a nice inverse head and shoulder structure. This thing is holding above the 1 hour 50 EMA, and Tesla has a historical tendency of pushing between many of these important levels, starting to push up very nicely as we approach big events like deliveries and earnings. So there's a good chance this is going to try to push up. There's an increased probability, but just to be safe, I'm going to be watching 260. Could we break and hold above 260? If it happens, this thing could go flying to 266. I'm sorry, 262.5, then 266. I'm going to be watching that as well. But there's a good chance it's going to make a nice move to the upside if we break 260. If it fails to do so, then it is what it is. It may just trade sideways. Why could that happen? Because we got some negative news involving Cathie Wood and some analysts saying that Tesla is overvalued right now. So, anything could happen, but I'm just trying to let you guys know the odds favor upside, in my opinion, based off the technical setup and based off what I'm seeing. And I just want to see it break 260 just for confirmation. For the triple Q, this is going to be the last one I go into more detail with before I become more broad. I want to mention that on one of these EMAs I was watching, I think it was holding, I think around the 15-minute is where I was watching. I'm not too sure. But anyways, it doesn't matter. Basically, you want to look at both support and resistance levels. It's been hovering above the 200 basically very nicely. 362 has been support, and that's what's holding this thing up. And as this thing has been holding that, we also have support around 363.5. So I'm going to be watching these levels in case it does break down. If it breaks below 362, watch 360, then 357.5. If it breaks to the upside, if it starts pushing even more, we have some resistance around 364, the entire zone. Break that, it's going to see 366, then 368, and then 370. These are our resistance levels. So now you know both support and resistance levels. Watch this formation. This has a potential inverse head and shoulders. If you zoom out, it actually looks a lot higher, which is where the left shoulder could be. There's a good chance this thing is going to start pushing to the upside and try to complete this inverse head and shoulders. And there's a chance that Tesla could help that push up even more. But just to be safe, you want to see this thing hold above 366 to get a break and a push towards 368 and potentially 370. Now, I am leaning more in the bullish direction, but I'm always going to be open-minded because it depends on PCE and a lot of the data that's dropping just to be safe. Just please be prepared for that. And with that said, I'm going to now talk about the other tickers with less detail. For AMD, for instance, I was watching this for today. This is not looking, in my opinion, too great or too bad. It's kind of in the middle. I think I was watching the 30-minute. If you look, it was pretty much just stuck today, but it was trying to get a breakout, just failed to do so. It still is in between the 30 minutes, 50 and 200 EMAs. I think the 1 hour looked a little bit better, so it's basically stuck right now. If this thing wants to break 113, that's going to be your bullish signal for it to get closer, in my opinion, to about 115. If it manages to hold below 110, it's going to likely make its way down to about 109 or so. But overall, when you zoom out of it, it is looking a little bit more bullish. It looks like it had a nice accumulation here. We have this imbalance up here around 120. I think that this bullish divergence is going to play out soon. And there's a good chance it's going to try to break to the upside over the next couple of trading days, maybe going into next week. I'm not too sure about tomorrow specifically, so I'm just going to be watching the levels. I think there's a good chance of upside very soon. Watch the levels just to be safe and watch all the data that's dropping tomorrow. NEO may perform like Tesla. If it breaks down, watch 9.25 and then $9. If it tries to push up, watch 9.6, 9.7, and then like around $10. I'm leaning in the direction that this thing may trade sideways and start pushing up because of the hype associated with deliveries. But just to be safe, we're just going to watch it carefully in all the support and resistance levels. If Netflix wants to turn bullish, it has to hold above the 50. If it breaks above that, watch 430, 435, 440. 437.5, and then like 440. If it breaks down, watch support right over here at 427.5, and then after that comes 425 and then 423. After that comes 420, then 414. But anyways, overall, I think that Netflix is looking kind of decent. It's trying to hold up for now, so we're going to be seeing how the market ends up dictating this. And after pumping quite a bit, it is very close to an important retracement level, which I'm going to be looking at in just a second. I have my Fibonacci retracement right here. We can actually double check this. Just to double check, I'm going to look at it like this. So we're very close to our like 0.5 retracement, just so happens to be around that 424 areas where we saw the low of the day. So these are the levels I'm watching on it. I think there's a good chance it's going to try to make its way above 430 tomorrow, but just to be safe, watch the data and see how it dictates it. For the NASDAQ, this thing ended up closing kind of in the red, but it is holding above the 50 EMA. So if this thing wants to remain bullish, we want to see this get closer to this gap around this 13,668 level. It could make an attempt to do so because there's a potential nice looking setup. I mean, you could argue there's like an inverse head and shoulder structure that's developing. It's a possibility. And there's a chance that this thing may get a bounce temporarily or at least try to push up for this gap at the very least. So it looks to me like Nasdaq's looking a little bit more in favor of the bulls, but just to be safe, watch support around 13,545. If it breaks below the 50, that's a bearish signal. If it manages to hold above this and starts pushing, watch this resistance around 13,650. If it breaks that, it could get closer to 13,700, which is where we just so happen to be around this gap. For SPX, okay? This is looking quite nice with an inverse head and shoulder. So it wants to push up more. You're going to be watching this resistance up here around 4,400. It looks like it wants to get there, and the odds greatly favor that. But just to be safe, we're going to be watching what PCE suggests. Okay, all the data that's coming out tomorrow. I think there's a good chance that this thing is going to try to keep going and try to get a green close. But just to be safe, watch support. The very important support is around 43.71 at the 50 EMA. You could see it touch this a couple of times over the last few days and managed to hold up. So watch that carefully just to be safe. Despite the market holding up just barely, the VIX is now very flat. It's not really doing much, not giving us a sense of direction. Could you argue there's an inverse head and shoulder? You could argue that, but there's no guarantee it's going to play out because there are plenty of times where it did not play out either. So I'm just going to watch this and see what this does. It's just going sideways, not really doing much, not giving us enough information. for us to determine what's going to happen to like the market because of it. So I'm not really looking at it too much. Now, if you look at the SQQQ, this thing remains weak. It's been trying to pump for quite a while. It just like barely makes its way up to like 20 before getting rejections. There's a possible inverse head and shoulders forming on here. I'm sorry, head and shoulders forming. Sorry about that, guys. This is a possible head and shoulders forming. If this thing starts breaking down below this 19.4 level, it could start dropping down to the 18s. If that's the case, that's going to be because of the NASDAQ and QQQ pumping. So we're going to be watching if that ends up being the case. If this thing tries to break above 20 exactly, then this thing has the potential to start pushing. But so far, when it hits 20 to 21, it just starts getting rejected. So for now, it's looking a little bit more bearish, which is favoring the bulls a bit more for the overall market. But just to be safe, we're going to be watching for confirmation. Coinbase is looking a little bit weaker now. It actually formed a bearish divergence right here. Got one last pump, and now it's starting to slow down a bit. Right now, the reason why I said that is because it has a potential double top like formation. It got a rejection right off of it. And you could see right over here, it actually broke below this potential wedge that was forming. So we can actually draw it out like this. Just real quick, you could draw it out just like this. Got a nice rejection right about here. Then you can draw out the top as well, but I'm going to just try to do this as fast as possible. So if it does end up bouncing, I mean, it is possible that this thing could try to make its way back up to about the 75 level, but you could see resistance is trying to slow it down after how much it was pumping. And there's a good chance it may make its way down to about 68 because of this like imbalance right over here. I could see it come down to 68, so I am leaning a little bit more in that direction. But just to be safe, we're going to be seeing it break below 70 for confirmation. It is still holding above 72 and 71.8, which just so happens to be where its support is. So watch that zone very carefully. If it breaks below it, watch 70, and if that fails us, it's going to likely make its way down to 68, potentially 66. If it tries to push up, we need to break above 75 to turn bullish. If it does that, that's going to be a good case, but my gut's telling me that this thing may cool off just a little bit first before that happens. For Alibaba, this is continuing to drop a bit. It's still a little bit red, and I told you this thing was looking very distributive, and it broke below 84, which is some important support. Uh, it's still looking a little bit weaker. I don't think it has to drop that low, which is where the start of this formation was. But next supports when I was watching would be around like 82.5. So it might make its way down there if it breaks below 83. If it tries to bounce, watch this like 84.77 as resistance. There is this like gap zone right over here, which could act as a magnet. But for now, it is looking more bearish. There's no true sign of a bounce. I'm going to be watching it very carefully at support. For Aapl, this thing is holding up quite nicely. It actually made a new all-time high in the pre-market, not the pre-market, sorry, the after hours today. And if it wants to turn bullish, it needs to hold above 290. If it 190, sorry, 190. If it holds above 190, it's going to likely push up to about 192. If it rejects off this, we're going to be watching 188.5, 187.5, and then 185 as support. Right now, it's holding up very nicely, but it is forming a bearish divergence. Could this thing push up a little bit more and then start declining next week, or could this thing just continue to hold? I think it's going to depend on PCE data. If PCE is too hot, the market may slow down. So could Aapl, so just be careful. But from a technical standpoint, Aapl is still looking strong. There's a good chance that if it does retest the 50 EMA around this 188.5 level to 189, it could still touch it and then bounce off of that and just try to make a new all-time high. It is still looking strong. There's no sign of weakness, so we shouldn't assume it's going to reverse just yet. But don't forget to watch those levels. Nvda is currently, once again, not looking that great. It is down a little bit more. It broke below this important level. And you could see on Nvda that this thing, I mean, could you argue that there's like this inverse head and shoulders forming on it? You could argue that, but there's no sign of a bounce just yet. So we're going to wait how this reacts after the data comes out. If it wants to turn bullish, watch 411, 415, 420, 421, and like 425 as resistance. If it breaks down, watch 405. After that, it's going to be 402-ish to 400, 396, and then 390 after that. I just wanted to clarify. Right now, it is looking a little bit weaker, but could there be an inverse head and shoulders forming? It is currently at support right now and held support around this 405 zone. So I'm just going to be watching to see if this could be forming an inverse head and shoulders or if it's going to break down. If it breaks below 405, it's going to be a bearish confirmation. Until then, I'm just going to wait for the data first just to be safe. For Google, if this thing wants to turn bullish, it has to break above 120, then 121, 122, then 123.8 could come, followed by about 125. If it turns bearish, you're going to be watching this thing break all the way down to about this imbalance around this like 118 zone. The odds are favoring this thing slowing down a bit, but we're about to get a 30-minute cross right here on the PPO. So I'm kind of in the middle. Depends on what PCE tells us. So we're just going to watch for that. This thing could rebound with the market and try to make its way back up to about 21. But just to be safe, let's just wait for the data and then react by the time we get to the morning. For Amazon, make sure you're watching these important resistance levels around this 28.4, 28.66 level. And then we have, did I say 28? I mean 128, 128.4, 128.66, then 130. Watch all of those. Then we have 131.5 and then 132.5 as resistance. If it breaks down, if it breaks below $27, because support right now is at 27, there's this imbalance way down here around 25. This 125 area is where we're going to see Amazon come down to if it breaks below 127. So watch that very carefully. It does look like it might come down here first. Maybe it bounces a little bit for Monday, then it ends up breaking down next week. That's a possibility too. We'll just have to wait and see on it. Last but not least for Meta, if this thing wants to turn bullish, we're going to be watching 283, 284 as resistance, 286, 287.5, and then 290 as major resistance. So far, it failed to break the major resistance. For support, watch 280, 277, 276, and then after that comes 272.5, and then 270 and 269. It is barely holding above the 50 EMA. It may try to bounce here because it typically bounces off the 50 on the 4-hour time frame. I'm going to be looking for a bounce on Meta if it tries to bounce here, but if it fails to do so, see if this thing is just going to get a temporary drop. It sometimes drops a little below the 50, then bounces right back up. We're going to be watching this carefully. It should try to bounce very soon, but just to be safe, we're going to be watching this level very carefully. So watch the 50 EMA on the 4-hour time frame. Supports around this like 180 zone. Watch that carefully and let's see if this thing drops temporarily and bounces back, or if this thing ends up actually tanking. So just be very careful. It depends on the news and what the data suggests. And until then, guys, I will see you guys tomorrow morning for more information about the stock market. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. Remain calm, cool, and collected, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you. Market to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright, and peace out.